Hello, my name is Dan Taylor with AMI Environmental, where we make environmental problems go away. Today's webinar I'll be covering lead-based paint in construction. Lead is a highly toxic metal used for many years in a range of products dating back to 6500 BC. Many construction products and materials were enhanced by the introduction of lead into their manufacture, the bulk of which was used in lead-based paint. Children and individuals with compromised immune systems are the highest at-risk population. Exposure to lead can result in a number of physical and mental development disorders. Common dangers include brain and nervous system damage, behavioral and learning difficulties, and delayed sensory and growth development. Elevated lead exposure in adults may have negative effects in reproduction, memory, and concentration. High blood pressure and nervous disorders can also be attributed to elevated blood levels in adults. Lead can be found in a wide range of materials and application, and is prevalent in older construction. Lead can commonly be found in paint, glazing, vinyls, soil, and plumbing. Lead was widely used because of its plasticity and softness, and added to paint in particular to help it dry faster. Products containing lead are more durable and cleanable, and highly resistant to mold, moisture, and corrosion, which made it very popular. Worker exposure creates one of the highest lead exposure concerns at this time, as lead is commonly absorbed into the body by inhalation. Lead dust, fume, or mist can be absorbed into the body through the lungs and upper respiratory tract of the exposed individual. Exposure to lead may also occur through the digestive system if it enters through the mouth and is ingested. Inhaled or ingested lead gets into the bloodstream, circulating through the body, and is stored in various tissues. Lead that is not filtered out of the body is stored in tissue and can cause damage to cells, organs, and even whole body systems. In construction, lead is frequently used in plumbing, electrical, roofing, and many exterior components. The Consumer Product Safety Commission bans the use of lead-based paint in residential properties. Lead-based paint continues to be used on many steel structures, although substitute coatings are available. Highest risk employees include iron workers, demolition laborers, lead-based paint abatement workers, and most general construction trades. Plumbers, welders, and painters are among the most likely to be exposed to lead during their routine work practices. Lead abatement workers removing paint from lead-based contaminated surfaces are the most vulnerable workers. Abatement work is common in residences during renovation activities, as well as repair and salvage work on bridges and other steel structures. The highest risk work includes abrasive blasting and welding, and cutting and burning on steel. Dry scraping and sanding, as well as manual demolition of structures, are also high-risk activities. Spray painting with lead-based paint poses an obvious risk to workers in the environment as well. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration's Lead in Construction Standard covers all metallic lead, inorganic compounds, and organic lead soaps. Maximum permissible limits, or PELs, and action limits for exposure to lead have been established and are published in the above referenced standard. The PEL of 50 micrograms per cubic meter of air over a time-weighted average of 8 hours dictates worker exposure reduction practices. An airborne concentration level, or action level, of 30 micrograms per cubic meter of air triggers specific employer compliance activities. OSHA's Lead in Construction Standard applies to all construction work that may expose employees to lead. Construction work defined in this standard includes all alteration and repair, including painting and decorating. Specific work activities are outlined as demolition or salvage, and removal or encapsulation of materials containing lead. New construction, repair, renovation, maintenance, and installation of products containing lead are also included. Requirements for emergency cleanup of lead contamination, including transportation and disposal, are also regulated by this standard. Employers are required to implement a lead worker protection program prior to employees performing site work. The program can be exhaustive based on the particular site and the specific requirements dictated by the level of potential employee exposure as determined by an initial hazard determination. Applying best practices, the plan should include as a minimum medical surveillance, respiratory protection, site-specific plan with engineering controls, including practices and procedures, industrial hygiene facilities, training, and record keeping. Where employee exposure exceeds the PEL, the employer is required to provide a written compliance plan to reduce harmful exposure. The program must provide for frequent and routine inspection of work by a competent person. An initial employee exposure assessment is required when it is anticipated that workers may be exposed to lead at or above the action level. Determination should be based on any information, observation, or calculation, including previous airborne measurements, that indicate potential exposure to lead. Historical data and measurements may be used on projects with similar scope and work practices to satisfy initial monitoring requirements. Employers of workers who may be exposed to lead must record and document the nature and relevancy of previous exposure data being used in lieu of initial monitoring efforts. This objective monitoring data must demonstrate that a particular lead-containing material, product, or process will not result in employee exposure at or above the action level. Prior to completing an exposure assessment that demonstrates that employees are not exposed above the permissible exposure limit, OSHA requires interim personal protection for all employees performing site work. The level of protection, as specified by the standard, is based on the tasks and associated work practices and procedures that historically produce high levels of exposure to lead. The presence of lead-based paint does not necessarily dictate a hazard if it is in good condition. Products manufactured with lead generally do not pose a danger unless they are damaged. Only the Housing and Urban Development Guidelines require specific action pertaining to lead-based paint in housing and child-occupied facilities. Regulations do not require lead paint abatement in the other facilities regardless of condition. A facility operator may choose to remove and replace components with lead-based paint as a permanent and usually most costly solution. Understanding the advantages and disadvantages may determine the best approach based on the current and/or planned occupancy patterns of the facility. Encapsulation of lead-based paint may be suitable in some circumstances. It is generally less expensive and intrusive, however, it does not provide a permanent solution. Again, the advantages and disadvantages must be considered based on occupancy. Remember, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has extensive worker protection guidelines for lead abatement activities, and compliance is the responsibility of the contractor and/or employer. The Environmental Protection Agency regulates the waste stream generated by renovation and demolition work. Debris containing greater than 5 parts of lead per million must be disposed of as hazardous waste. Lead concentrations in a waste stream is determined by toxicity characteristic leachate procedure, or a T-clip sample. This testing is utilized to determine a cumulative amount of lead present in the material. Identifying the location of lead in a facility can help minimize the potential for dangerous exposure to building occupants. Addressing building components contaminated with lead prior to renovation or demolition allows those sources to be isolated from the general debris waste stream and disposed of separately. This also reduces costs. Hazardous waste can cost as much as 10 times more to dispose of than general debris. The two primary techniques for testing and analysis for the presence of lead in paint are X-ray fluorescence and bulk sampling for laboratory analysis. XRF is non-invasive and produces instantaneous results, Bulk samples require time for analysis off-site and requires disturbance of finished surface. I'd like to thank you for joining us. My name is Dan Taylor. I'm with AMI Environmental, where we make environmental problems go away. If you have any questions, we can be reached 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on our national hotline at 1-800-828-8487. Or you can find us on the web at www.amienvironmental.com. Again, my name is Dan Taylor. Thank you for joining us and have a safe day.